Story 1. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago. Jake adjusted his camera, the red recording light blinking steadily as he panned across the gnarled trees of Blackroot Forest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something rotten. "Guys, this place is serious creepy," Mia muttered, her breath fogging in the cold air. She clutched her flashlight tighter, its beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. "Relax," Tyler said, grinning. "That's why we're here, right? To find the real haunted places the internet doesn't talk about." He tapped his phone, scrolling through an old forum post. According to this, people used to hear voices in these woods, whispers with no source. Some even vanished without a trace. A twig snapped somewhere behind them. All three froze. Jake swallowed hard. "Did you hear that?" Silence. Then, a whisper. Not from any of them. From the trees. The whispers grew louder as they trekked deeper. Fragments of words, half-formed sentences. "Always just out of earshot." "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Mia said, her voice trembling. "We should go back." But the path behind them was gone. The trees had shifted, closing in like skeletal fingers. Then Tyler screamed. Something yanked him into the underbrush, fast, violent. His flashlight rolled to the ground, casting jagged shadows as the forest erupted in movement. Jake's camera caught it just for a second. A figure. Tall, too tall. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, its face a hollow void. Then it was gone, dragging Tyler with it. They ran, branches clawing at their skin. The whispers were screams now, pleas for help in voices they recognized. Tyler's voice? But Tyler was dead. Mia sobbed as something wet and unseen brushed against her neck. Jake kept filming, his hands shaking. The camera's night vision flickered, revealing glimpses of the thing following them, always just out of focus, always smiling. Then Mia tripped. The last thing Jake saw before the camera died was her being pulled into the earth itself, the ground opening like a hungry maw. Jake was alone now. His phone had no signal. His camera's battery was dead. But the whispers, they were louder than ever. And they were his voice now. He turned and there it stood. The hollow. Its mouth stretched wide, filled with the faces of the lost. Tyler. Mia. Dozens of others. It spoke in their voices. "Join us." The last thing Jake heard was his own scream, echoing forever in the depths of Blackroot Forest. A week later, a hiker found Jake's camera. The footage was corrupted except for one final clip. A shaky, blood-smeared close-up of the hollow's face. And a whisper, "You're next." Story 2. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay as the three friends pushed deeper into Blackroot Forest. Jake adjusted the GoPro mounted on his chest. Its dim red light the only proof it was still recording. "This place looks different than the satellite images," he muttered, swatting away a cloud of gnats that seemed unnaturally attracted to his face. Mia's flashlight beam danced across the tree trunks, revealing strange markings carved into the bark, symbols that looked too precise to be natural. Tyler laughed too loudly, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. "Relax, guys. So the trees have some scratches. Probably just kids messing around." But his hand trembled as he reached out to touch one of the carvings. The moment his fingers made contact, a chorus of twigs snapped in the darkness beyond their lights. All three froze, their breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Something was moving out there. Not the random rustling of animals, but something keeping pace with them just beyond the light's edge. Mia's flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement, something pale and too tall ducking behind a massive oak. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Before anyone could answer, the whispering started. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once, as if the forest itself was speaking. The whispers weren't in any language they recognized, yet somehow they understood. The same three words repeated in dozens of different voices: "Leave while you can." Jake's camera picked up something his eyes couldn't see, fleeting shadows that moved against the wind, forming shapes that made his stomach clench. Tyler finally stopped pretending to be brave. "We need to go. Now." But when they turned to retrace their steps, the path had vanished. The trees stood much closer together than before, their branches intertwined like grasping fingers. That's when they heard the first scream. Not from ahead of them, but from behind, exactly where they'd just been standing. It sounded like Tyler's voice, but they could all see Tyler right beside them, his face drained of color. The scream came again, this time from their left, then their right, moving impossibly fast through the trees. Mia grabbed Jake's arm so hard it hurt. "That's not possible," she breathed. The camera's night vision flickered, and in that moment they all saw it. A pale figure standing between two trees 20 yards ahead, its elongated limbs twitching, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then the forest erupted in motion. The trees themselves seemed to lean inward as dozens of those pale shapes emerged from the darkness. The last thing the camera recorded was Mia's scream being abruptly cut off, Tyler vanishing into the underbrush as if yanked by invisible hands, and Jake's own horrified realization that the whispers had been right all along. The camera was found a month later by a search party, perfectly intact despite the autumn rains. The memory card contained exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds of footage after the group entered Blackroot Forest. The final frame showed Jake's face, twisted in terror, his mouth forming words the microphone didn't pick up. Forensic analysts enhanced the audio and discovered what he'd been saying. The same phrase whispered throughout the forest that night. They were here first. To this day, hikers occasionally report hearing whispers in Blackroot Forest. Some claim to recognize the voices of those 3 missing friends. And every once in a while, someone brave or foolish enough to venture off the trails will find fresh carvings in the bark of the oldest trees, symbols that look suspiciously like the letters J, M, and T. The park rangers have stopped investigating these reports. They know better than to go looking in the deep woods after dark. Story 3. The dense canopy swallowed all traces of sunlight as Ethan pushed deeper into the woods, his boots sinking into the spongy moss underfoot. He'd taken this shortcut a dozen times before, but today something felt wrong. The air hung too still, the usual bird song replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional creak of ancient branches. His phone's GPS had glitched out 10 minutes ago, the map spinning uselessly as he tried to reorient himself. A cold droplet landed on his neck, trickling down his collar. When Ethan wiped it away, his fingers came away streaked with something dark and viscous that smelled faintly of copper. He looked up into the twisted branches overhead and saw them, dozens of ragged strips of cloth tied to the limbs, swaying gently despite the absence of wind. Each was stained a deep reddish-brown, the fabric frayed at the edges as if torn from clothing in a hurry. The crunch of dry leaves behind him made Ethan whirl around, his flashlight beam cutting through the gathering gloom. Nothing moved in the circle of light, but the underbrush 30 yards away trembled as something passed through it. Something big. The hairs on his arms stood up as a low, wet gurgling sound echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Ethan's breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air as he backed away, his pulse hammering in his throat. The flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness he saw them, pale shapes moving between the tree trunks, their movements all wrong, limbs bending in impossible ways. When the light steadied, they were gone. But the smell of damp earth and rotting meat grew stronger, clinging to the back of his throat. His retreating foot caught on an exposed root, sending him sprawling onto the forest floor. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, and when he rolled onto his back, he saw it. Towering above him stood a figure wrapped in strips of that same stained cloth, its elongated shadow stretching across the leaf litter despite having no visible light source to cast it. The thing's face, if it could be called a face, was a featureless expanse of puckered, scarred flesh, save for a lipless mouth that stretched too wide when it spoke. "You're late," it rasped in a voice that sounded like dead leaves scraping against bark. Ethan scrambled backward, his hands sinking into something warm and wet. He didn't want to look, but his body moved without conscious thought. The flashlight beam illuminated the forest floor around him. The moss wasn't green anymore, but a deep, glistening red. Dozens of shallow depressions dotted the earth, each filled with that same dark liquid. And in the nearest one, something pale and segmented broke the surface before disappearing again. The whispering started then, not from the figure before him but from the trees themselves. Hundreds of voices overlapping in a susurrus of half-formed words and choked-off screams. The cloth-wrapped creature tilted its head as if listening, then reached for Ethan with fingers that kept lengthening, the bones cracking audibly as they stretched toward him. Ethan ran. Branches whipped at his face as he crashed through the undergrowth, his lungs burning. Behind him, the whispering rose to a deafening crescendo, the words becoming clearer with every panicked step. "Stay with us. Join us. Feed us." His foot caught on something solid hidden beneath the leaves. Ethan hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. When he rolled over, he saw what had tripped him. A moss-covered skull grinned up at him, its jaw hanging open in silent laughter. More bones lay scattered around it, some still bearing ragged strips of flesh. The flashlight flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, cold hands closed around Ethan's ankles. The last thing he saw before being dragged into the rustling underbrush was his own reflection in the skull's empty eye sockets. Except the reflection was smiling. 3 days later, park rangers found Ethan's backpack propped against a lightning-scarred oak, its contents neatly arranged as if for display. His phone lay atop the folded jacket, the screen cracked but still functional. When they powered it on, the voice memo app was open, containing a single recording, 30 seconds of ragged breathing, followed by a wet crunching sound and a chorus of whispers saying "thank you" in perfect unison. The search was called off at sundown when the dogs refused to enter a particular thicket, their whimpers turning to howls whenever the wind shifted. That section of forest was marked off limits the next day, though the official paperwork cited unsafe terrain as the reason. But sometimes when the moon is full and the wind blows from the east, hikers report seeing strange shapes moving through the trees. And if you listen very carefully, just before dawn when the world holds its breath, you can still hear them whispering. They're always hungry. They're always waiting. And the woods stretch much deeper than the maps show. Story 4. The forest had a name once, but no one remembers it now. The locals simply call it the Hollow, a stretch of dense, ancient woodland where the trees grow too close together and the sunlight never quite reaches the ground. The air there is always still, thick with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. People don't go into the Hollow if they can help it. But sometimes, the forest calls to those who don't know better. Lena should have known better. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Blackwater Creek had. Tales of hikers who wandered in and never came out. Of hunters who swore they saw faces in the bark of the trees. Of children who claimed the woods whispered their names at night. But Lena wasn't a child anymore, and she didn't believe in ghost stories. At least, not until the night she got lost in the Hollow. The sun was already low in the sky when Lena set out, her camera slung over her shoulder. She was a photographer, always chasing the perfect shot, and the golden light filtering through the autumn leaves was too beautiful to ignore. She had only meant to go a little way in, just far enough to get some good pictures before dusk. But the deeper she walked, the stranger the woods became. The trees here were gnarled and twisted, their trunks covered in deep, jagged grooves like claw marks. The air grew colder, her breath frosting in front of her face despite the mild October evening. And then there were the sounds. At first, she thought it was just the wind. A soft rustling, a faint whisper brushing against her ears. But the longer she listened, the more it sounded like words. Lena. She froze. That had been her name. Clear as day. Her heart pounded as she turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The forest was eerily silent now, as if holding its breath. Then, a child's laughter. High and bright, it echoed through the trees, bouncing from trunk to trunk until she couldn't tell where it was coming from. Lena's skin prickled. There were no children out here. No one was supposed to be out here at all. "Hello," she called, her voice shaking. The laughter stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, a small voice answered. "Help me." Lena's blood turned to ice. The voice was young, a little girl's, and it was terrified. "Where are you?" Lena called, stepping forward despite the dread coiling in her stomach. "Here," the voice whispered. "I'm here." It was coming from a thicket of bushes up ahead. Lena pushed through the branches, her hands trembling. And then she saw her. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, standing in the center of a small clearing. She wore a tattered white dress, her dark hair hanging in messy tangles around her pale face. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. She was just staring at Lena. And then she smiled. It was wrong. Too wide. Too many teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," the girl whispered. Behind her, the trees groaned. Lena stumbled back as the shadows between the trunks shifted, peeling away from the bark like living things. Figures emerged, tall, skeletal things with hollow eyes and mouths stretched in silent screams. They moved toward her, their limbs twitching, their fingers too long, too sharp. The little girl's smile widened. "They're hungry," she whispered. "And you're all alone." Lena turned and ran. Branches lashed at her arms and face as she crashed through the undergrowth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the forest shrieked, a sound like nails on glass, like 100 voices screaming at once. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. Not until she burst from the tree line and collapsed onto the dirt road, sobbing. They found her camera the next morning, lying at the edge of the hollow. The last photo was still on the screen, a blurry shot of the clearing, the little girl standing in the center. But in the picture, she wasn't alone. Dozens of pale, gaunt faces peered out from the trees behind her, their hollow eyes fixed on the lens. On Lena. And written in the dirt at the girl's feet, barely visible but unmistakable, was a single word. "Soon." Lena never went back to the hollow, but sometimes late at night she hears laughter outside her window. And the whispering. Always the whispering. We're still hungry.